Okay. My opponent's first claim was that militarized drones are inaccurate and can be affected by things that are outside of human control, like weather conditions, air conditions, and ground conditions. I would like to first point out that drones have a very unique ability of being able to loiter over target areas for hours on end without worrying about pilot fatigue or airplane fatigue. When one drone runs out of fuel after loitering for 20 hours, another one can easily come and replace it, and the same thing can be used for pilots. Now, an article by the Wall Street Journal said that unlike fighter jets or cruise missiles, predators can loiter over their targets for more than 20 hours, take photos in which men, women, and children can be clearly distinguished, and they added the point that burqas can be very visible from 20,000 feet, the typical altitude of a drone. And they can deliver laser-guided munitions with low explosive yields, meaning that the weapons used by drones are typically less explosive and less destructive than traditional explosives dropped by piloted vehicles. Now, my opponent wanted to claim that there is no such thing as guaranteed precision, and that's why the drone should be abolished. The same claim can be made for any sort of alternative to drones. Any piloted aircraft has no such guaranteed precision. The alternatives to drone laser-guided missiles include carpet bombings, mortar fire, or other forms of munitions delivery from miles away, such as planes, ships, and ground troops. My opponent's second claim was that the mental state of the drone pilots is severely affected by flying the drones and seeing the effects of their actions in great detail from millions of miles away. In an article by the Brown Political Review, drone psychological effects on users are not much different than manned mission pilots or boots-on-the-ground soldiers. It said that strikes can cause other damages that are not typically included in the calculus of casualties. These include serious psychological trauma and widespread fear among civilians, effects that can extend far beyond the impact crater. But because data like that are extremely difficult to measure, intelligence officials suspect that limited and precise drone campaigns may lead to less anti-American sentiment than a full-scale boots-on-the-ground land war, and drones typically lead to fewer civilian casualties than conventional warfare. Another point brought up by the Brown Political Review stated that drones are very poorly monitored, which would imply that they are negatively used by the government, and their effects can be impossible to report. However, the use of drones can be much safer to both ground units of the Allied forces and can be much more accurate in delivering the proper use of explosives to the combatant. My opponent's third claim was that drones themselves will lead to an all-out warfare or a sort of arms race across nations. I would like to point out that this is a logical fallacy, that the slippery slope of developing one drone leads to the development of an infinite number of drones, and that the use of secrecy between governments contributes to the increase in civilian deaths. A study by UNmissions.com said that drone civilian deaths account for only 6% of all civilian deaths in the Middle East. That same website said that 2/3 of all civilian deaths in the Middle East come from anti-government extremists, like suicide bombers, improvised explosives, and ground engagements. The UNAMA documented 631 civilian casualties total, of which only 6% were caused by aerial operations by Allied forces. Another aspect of drones that is typically addressed by opponents of the system is that killing enemies from miles away is immoral. I would like to introduce the idea of a battleship possibly 15 miles away from its target being able to lob projectiles with just as much accuracy as drone pilots or manned pilots. So the claim that killing enemies from miles away is immoral is not backed by any sort of evidence that contributes to drones themselves being the cause of the problem. Drones also minimize the risk to soldiers who operate them, which would imply that they are morally correct as opposed to morally incorrect. A quote by the socialistworker.org said that there's no pilot risk of being killed or maimed in a crash, no pilot to be taken captive by enemy forces, no pilot to cause a diplomatic crisis if shot down in a friendly country while bombing or spying without official permission. If a drone crashes or is shot down, the pilot back home can simply get up and take a coffee break. This, I think, very well summarizes the reason why militarized drones can be much more effective than piloted drones. And it very well emphasizes the fact that they are safer and more effective for the countries that they are in use for.